March 27 BCE. Rome is quiet after dusk, but not peaceful. In the narrow streets behind the Forum, oil lamps flicker against stone walls, and doors close with deliberate care. Tonight, a young woman is escorted from her father's house, surrounded by witnesses who claim this procession represents honor, stability, and tradition. Officially, this is a celebration. Unofficially, it is the beginning of something she has been trained not to question. Her voice will not be recorded. Her fear will not be documented. What happens next will take place behind closed doors, protected by law, ritual, and silence.
Rome calls this order. The imbalance is absolute. The law stands on one side, custom stands on the other, and between them stands a woman whose consent is assumed, whose resistance is irrelevant, whose future is no longer her own. She has been told this night is necessary. She has been told it is sacred. She has been told that to endure it quietly is proof of virtue. This is not an isolated moment. It is not an accident. It is a system. And it is the system Rome later tried to erase. In investigations like this, dark inquest history exists to examine what official history celebrated and what they deliberately avoided, especially when tradition masked control and suffering behind ceremonial language.
Within the first hour of every Roman marriage, power was formally transferred. Not emotionally, not symbolically, legally. A woman passed from one authority to another, and the law did not ask how she felt about it. The ritualized wedding night was not about intimacy. It was about confirmation, about compliance, about proving that the transfer had been completed. This is the story of the wedding night ritual Rome tried to erase from history. To understand why Rome worked so carefully to remove this subject from its public memory, we must understand the society that created it.
Rome was not governed only by emperors and armies. It was governed by households. The Roman family was a political unit, and at its center stood the pater familias, the male head of the household, whose authority extended over property, labor, marriage, and life itself. His power was not theoretical, it was enforceable, and women, regardless of status, existed legally under that authority. Marriage in Rome was not primarily a personal bond, it was a contract, a strategic alignment between families, a means of preserving bloodlines, wealth, and influence. Love was optional.
Stability was mandatory. For women, this meant marriage was not a choice but an expectation. From an early age, girls were prepared for a future defined by obedience. Education, when permitted, emphasized modesty, silence, and endurance. The ideal Roman woman was not admired for happiness or autonomy, but for restraint. By the late Republic and early Empire, marriage rituals had become rigidly codified. Every gesture carried symbolic weight. Every word spoken publicly reinforced a private reality that could not be discussed openly. The wedding night stood at the center of this contradiction.
Publicly, it was framed as the consummation of a sacred union. Privately, it was a test, one that determined a woman's value, security, and survival within her new household. Failure to meet expectations, even when those expectations were unreasonable or cruel, carried consequences that were legal, social, and lasting. What makes this ritual especially disturbing is not any single act, but the environment surrounding it. The woman was rarely alone by choice. She was escorted, observed, evaluated. Her transition was overseen by others whose loyalty was to tradition, not to her well-being.
The law allowed no delay, no reconsideration, no withdrawal. Roman writers spoke of this night indirectly, using euphemisms that disguised its reality. They referred to duty, to order, to nature. They praised women who endured it silently, framing submission as moral strength. What they did not record were the emotions. Fear was expected, but not acknowledged. Distress was anticipated, but not considered relevant. Any hesitation was treated not as a human response, but as a flaw to be corrected. This is where the system reveals itself most clearly. Rome did not require affection.
It required compliance. For women of lower status, the imbalance was even more severe. Enslaved women, freed women, and captives had no legal protection at all. Their experiences were rarely named, let alone preserved. When they appear in records, it is usually through property inventories or legal disputes, never through personal testimony. For elite women, visibility did not equal safety. Their marriages were public, their behavior scrutinized, and their reputations tightly controlled. A single accusation could destroy not only their standing, but their family's position. The wedding night was a point of no return. Once it passed, the law assumed completion. Disputes afterward were difficult, sometimes impossible to raise. Silence became the safest option. Endurance became the expected response. Over time, this silence hardened into tradition. Roman society was deeply concerned with appearances. Stability depended on the illusion that its systems were orderly and benevolent. Acknowledging harm within foundational rituals would have undermined that image. So the language changed. Later Roman writers softened descriptions.
They emphasized harmony, mutual obligation, domestic peace. The darker implications were pushed aside, reframed as misunderstandings or exaggerated by outsiders. As Christianity spread and Roman values shifted, earlier customs became inconvenient. Practices once justified by law now conflicted with emerging moral frameworks. Rather than confront them openly, Rome's chroniclers simply stopped discussing them. Absence replaced accountability. This is how erasure works, not through denial, but through omission. The women who passed through these rituals did not leave memoirs.
They did not control the archives. Their experiences survived only indirectly, in legal reforms, in anxious moral treatises, in warnings passed quietly between generations. The fear lingered even as the words disappeared. This ritual shaped how Roman women understood marriage for centuries. It taught them that their bodies were not their own, that obedience was safety, that silence was survival. And it taught Roman men that authority did not require justification. As we move deeper into this investigation, the question is no longer whether this ritual existed.
The evidence, fragmented as it is, confirms that it did. The question is why a civilization so meticulous in its record-keeping chose to forget it. By the time the ceremony ended, the law considered the matter settled. The transition was complete. What followed inside the household was no longer a public concern. Roman authority was structured this way by design. Once a woman crossed the threshold of her husband's home, the state withdrew its gaze. Whatever occurred afterward was classified as private order, beyond challenge and beyond appeal. This separation between public ritual and private consequence was one of Rome's most effective tools of control.
The wedding night was not regulated through explicit instruction. There were no formal manuals detailing behavior, no official proclamations outlining expectations. Instead, the system relied on assumption. Everyone knew what was expected. Everyone understood what silence meant. This ambiguity protected the institution while leaving women exposed. In Roman legal thought, ambiguity favored authority. Women entered marriage with fewer rights than they left behind. Under certain forms of marriage, a woman moved completely under her husband's legal power, equivalent to a daughter within his household.
Her property, her labor, her future decisions, all were absorbed into a structure that prioritized male lineage and continuity. Refusal was not anticipated. Resistance was not accommodated. If a woman expressed distress, it was interpreted as immaturity. If she hesitated, it was framed as ignorance. If she objected, it was treated as disorder. The system did not ask whether harm was occurring. It asked only whether order was preserved. This is where enforcement began, not through overt violence, but through expectation. Mothers, aunts, and older women were often tasked with preparation.
They did not describe details. They warned of necessity. They spoke of endurance. They emphasized that whatever was feared would pass, but reputation would not recover from failure. In this way, the system perpetuated itself through internalized discipline. Women became the carriers of warnings they had never been allowed to question. Outside the household, Roman society reinforced these lessons relentlessly. Plays mocked disobedient wives, philosophers praised female restraint, moralists warned that instability in marriage threatened the entire state. The message was consistent. A woman's discomfort was insignificant compared to social order.
Men, meanwhile, were instructed in authority rather than responsibility. The law granted them power without requiring accountability. Any harm that occurred behind closed doors was reclassified as domestic management. This legal blindness was not accidental. It was essential. Records show that disputes related to marriage rarely addressed a woman's experience. Cases focused on lineage, inheritance, legitimacy. If a marriage failed, the woman bore the stigma. If harmony was disrupted, she was assumed to be at fault. The wedding night was often cited indirectly in these disputes, never examined directly.
Its success or failure was inferred from outcomes: pregnancy, obedience, silence. Silence was interpreted as consent. What happened when silence broke is more revealing than the ritual itself. Women who attempted to speak about mistreatment faced layered consequences. Family pressure discouraged complaint. Legal frameworks offered no protection. Public exposure risked social ruin. Even sympathetic listeners lacked authority to intervene. The system did not need force to suppress dissent. It relied on inevitability. For enslaved women, the situation was even starker.
Their marriages, when recognized at all, carried no legal weight. Their wedding nights were not ceremonial, but administrative, arranged according to economic convenience. Their suffering was not recorded because it was not considered relevant. The absence of records is itself evidence. Rome documented taxes, land transfers, military supply chains with precision. It recorded omens and dreams. It preserved trivial disputes between elites. Yet it left no formal account of how women experienced one of the most consequential moments of their lives. This selective silence reveals priority.
As the empire expanded, these practices spread. Local customs were absorbed into Roman law, often becoming harsher under imperial standardization. Women in distant provinces encountered Roman marriage structures layered onto existing traditions, compounding control rather than moderating it. Over generations, the wedding night became less discussed, not less powerful. Language shifted. Earlier texts spoke cautiously. Later ones avoided the subject entirely. By the late empire, writers emphasized spiritual union and moral companionship, creating the illusion that marriage had always been benign.
This was not reform, it was revision. Historical erasure rarely announces itself. It happens gradually through omission, reinterpretation, and moral reframing. By the time later generations looked back, the ritual had been stripped of its implications, reduced to harmless symbolism. But systems leave residue. Roman women continued to approach marriage with apprehension long after official language softened. Advice literature still warned of obedience. Moral texts still equated virtue with endurance. The fear remained, even when its source went unnamed.
This is the psychological legacy of enforced silence. The wedding night ritual functioned not only as an event, but as a lesson. It taught women that boundaries were negotiable only for those in power. It taught men that authority did not require justification, and it taught society that stability mattered more than individual suffering. Halfway through this investigation, it becomes clear that remembering these structures is not about condemning the past for its own sake. It is about recognizing how easily harm becomes tradition when it is protected by law and disguised as necessity.
This is why dark inquest history continues this work. Not to sensationalize what cannot be undone, but to examine how silence itself becomes a tool of control when history decides what is worth recording. Failure was not defined by refusal alone. In Rome, failure could be assumed, inferred, or quietly declared without a woman ever speaking a word. A marriage that did not produce visible harmony was treated as defective. And when a system is built on appearances, defect is treated as threat. For women who could not conform, whether through visible distress, ongoing illness, or an inability to produce heirs, the consequences unfolded slowly, deliberately, and often without witnesses.
Rome rarely punished directly when it could marginalize instead. The law provided mechanisms that appeared neutral but operated with precision. A husband could claim incompatibility. A family could question suitability. A household could reduce a woman's influence without explanation. None of these actions required public justification. They required only silence and time. This is how women disappeared without being removed. Historical records show a pattern of abrupt divorces following early marriages, often accompanied by vague language about disorder or imbalance. These accounts never elaborate. They do not ask what imbalance meant. They do not ask who defined it. The woman's voice remains absent. Once returned to her birth family, a woman carried an invisible mark. She was no longer untouched by the system, but not protected by it either. Remarriage was possible, but never equal. Each subsequent union reduced her leverage. Each transition reinforced her disposability. For some, return was not permitted at all. Women without supportive families, captives, freed women, those married far from home, had fewer exits. If they were set aside, they were absorbed into the household in diminished roles, reassigned, or simply excluded from visibility.
Their names vanished from records. Their lives continued, but without acknowledgement. Rome excelled at making people administratively invisible. The most revealing evidence comes from moral literature rather than legal codes. Roman writers warned men about wives who were unsettled, difficult, or unfit for harmony. These descriptions are deliberately vague. They shift responsibility away from conduct and toward character. The implication was clear. If order was disrupted, the woman was the problem. What followed was not spectacle, but erosion, reduced status.
Isolation, emotional pressure applied through ritual neglect, exclusion from family rights. Each measure communicated the same message. Compliance was the only path back to stability. This was punishment without punishment. Women internalized this lesson early. They learned that survival depended on adaptation, not justice. That speaking too clearly invited risk. That endurance, even when damaging, was safer than resistance. The wedding night ritual was the threshold, but its consequences extended across a lifetime. As years passed, Rome's public narrative evolved.
Emperors promoted images of moral renewal. Laws emphasized marital fidelity and family values. On the surface, this appeared to elevate women's status. In practice, it intensified scrutiny. A woman's private life became a matter of public virtue, while her private suffering remained unaddressed. This contradiction sharpened under Augustus when moral legislation attempted to regulate marriage and reproduction. Women were praised as symbols of stability while being denied agency within the very structures meant to protect society. The system demanded their participation, but refused their testimony. By this point, earlier rituals were no longer described openly. Their implications conflicted with the image Rome wished to project: disciplined, enlightened, orderly.
Acknowledging that foundational customs had caused harm would have required self-examination. Rome chose continuity instead. So the past was edited. Later historians focused on reform, omitting the mechanisms that made reform necessary. They praised progress without naming what preceded it. The wedding night ritual faded from explicit mention, surviving only in fragments, references, and cultural aftershocks.
But erasure is never complete. Archaeological evidence suggests domestic spaces designed for separation and control. Literary metaphors reveal persistent anxiety around marriage. Legal adjustments hint at long-standing abuse of authority. Each clue points back to a system that required silence to function. Women carry the memory even when history did not. The fear did not vanish with language. It lingered in expectations passed from mother to daughter, in warnings disguised as advice, in the quiet understanding that marriage was not a partnership, but a negotiation with power.
This is the cost of institutionalized silence. As Christianity gained influence and Rome transformed, the old rituals were reframed as relics of a less moral age. Yet the structures of control remained, absorbed into new doctrines, renamed but familiar. The lesson endured. Authority over women was natural, necessary, and not to be questioned. What changed was only the explanation. At this point in the investigation, the wedding night ritual stands revealed not as an isolated cruelty, but as a gateway. It initiated women into a system that prioritized order over dignity, continuity over consent, and silence over truth.
Its erasure was strategic. To remember it now is not to sensationalize the past, but to restore context. To understand how deeply power can embed itself into tradition. To recognize that the most effective forms of control rarely announce themselves as violence. They present themselves as normal. By the time the Roman Empire dissolved, the ritual itself had largely vanished from explicit description. Not because it had been corrected, but because it had been absorbed. Systems of control do not disappear when they are no longer named. They persist by adapting, by changing language, by embedding themselves into new moral frameworks.
What Rome left behind was not a practice, but a pattern. Later European societies inherited Roman legal thinking almost intact. Marriage remained a transfer of authority. Silence remained a virtue. Domestic suffering remained a private matter. The vocabulary softened, but the structure endured. Where Rome had spoken of order, later traditions spoke of duty. Where Rome demanded endurance, later cultures praised patience. The cost was the same. Because Rome never publicly reckoned with the harm built into its foundational rituals, it passed that harm forward unexamined. The wedding night ritual did not need to survive in detail to continue shaping expectations. Its logic lived on, that women's fear was secondary, that compliance equaled legitimacy, that what happened behind closed doors did not belong to history. This is why the ritual was erased rather than debated. To admit its reality would have forced Rome to acknowledge that its celebrated stability was maintained through imbalance, that its moral authority relied on silence, that its laws protected order, not people. So the record was cleaned. What remained were idealized images of Roman marriage, statues of harmony, inscriptions praising fidelity, texts celebrating domestic peace.
These were not lies, but they were incomplete. They told the story Rome wanted remembered, not the one that explained its cost. The women who lived through these systems did not vanish. They adapted. They learned how to survive within constraints that offered no justice. Their strategies, silence, compliance, caution, were later mistaken for consent. Endurance was reframed as acceptance. This misunderstanding is one of history's most persistent errors. When we look back and see no resistance, it is tempting to assume there was none. But resistance does not always take the form of rebellion.
In systems where punishment is quiet and authority absolute, survival itself becomes an act of calculation. The absence of testimony is not proof of peace, it is evidence of risk. The wedding night ritual Rome tried to erase matters because it reveals how power operates most effectively, not through spectacle, but through normalization, not through chaos, but through routine, not through cruelty that shocks, but through practices that appear ordinary enough to escape scrutiny. Remembering it now does not undo what was done, but it interrupts the final stage of control, forgetting.
History often honors civilizations for what they built, not for what they concealed. But a complete record requires both. It requires us to ask not only how order was maintained, but who paid for it. Not only what endured, but what was silenced to ensure that endurance. This investigation is not about judging Rome by modern standards. It is about understanding Rome on its own terms, recognizing that its greatest strength, organization, was also its most dangerous tool when left unchecked. The women subjected to these rituals were not anomalies, they were central to the system's function. Their silence was not accidental, it was required. And that is why their absence from the record matters. If their experiences feel unsettling to confront, it is because they challenge a comforting narrative that civilization progresses cleanly, that tradition refines itself without harm, that stability is neutral. History shows otherwise. Stability always has a cost. Someone always absorbs it. The wedding night ritual Rome tried to erase reminds us that power prefers amnesia, that institutions outlive accountability, and that forgetting is often presented as peace.
But silence is not peace. It is unfinished history. If preserving the memory of those whose experiences were deliberately left unrecorded matters to you, then continuing this work with Dark Inquest History is not about subscribing to a channel. It is about refusing to let omission stand in for truth. It is about keeping erased lives from disappearing completely. Because the last injustice these women were subjected to was being forgotten.